Right, good afternoon everybody and welcome to the Zemo annual conference, parallel session 1, how can I go electric, joining up transport and energy. So we've heard a lot this morning about the issues that we face in terms of meeting the commitments that government has made. And I'd like to welcome to this session, which we look at how the private motorists and fleets can go electric, looking at both vehicles, the charging options, tariffs, and support available and needed to decarbonise road transport. My name is Jonathan Murray, and I'm the Policy and Operations Director at the Zemo Partnership, and I'm also the coordinator of the Electric Vehicle Energy Task Force, which Zemo hosts on behalf of OZEV and BEIS. And I'll be chairing this session. We're going to be hearing from our panel in a moment, and I'm going to be asking them to respond to some, first of all, some position statements and to start the ball rolling. And then we'll be opening up to questions and answers. And we want to make this as inclusive as possible. But there'll be a large number of you there, so please can we post questions in the chat or raise hands. So we're all aware that UK must tackle transport emissions to avoid huge climate change impacts and to meet its commitment to net zero, a message that was made clear this morning. Transport contributes 1/3 of all carbon emissions in the UK, and since 1990, these numbers have barely reduced at all, while other sectors have reduced, leaving transport currently as the single largest emitter. Last week, as we're very much aware, government published its transport decarbonisation plan, a plan that's been much awaited, and there's been a lot to digest. The plan, which provides a roadmap for decarbonisation of transport sectors, outlines a number of strategic priorities to help achieve this, including accelerating modal shift, decarbonising road transport, and how we deliver our goods, developing place-based solutions, and also making sure that the UK remains a centre of excellence for the development of vehicle technology and innovation, and that we take this out into the global economy. Perhaps more importantly for this conversation was the publication of the Transition to Zero Emission Cars and Vans, the 2035 Delivery Plan, which government published alongside the Transport Delivery Plan, and which details government's plans for all new cars and vans to be 100% zero emissions by 2035. Focusing on increasing the uptake of zero emission vehicles, accelerating the rollout of charge point infrastructure, more smart charging capability, improved recycling, especially for batteries, ensuring the energy system can cope with the increased load and sustainable energy that's going to be generated, and creating market conditions to encourage the decarbonisation of road transport. So today, we're analysing some of this detail and focusing on the solutions which can help private motorists and fleets make this transition. In particular, how do we make a compelling case for motorists to acquire, use, and recharge zero-emission vehicles over the next decade? A task for both the public and private sectors to address. To help us tackle these questions, we have a fantastic set of panelists joining us today. They include Rolle Nieminen, Director of EVA England, and Rolle, has over 15 years automotive experience across European countries supporting the automotive sector, and is also an advocate of new transport innovations. We have Fiona Howarth, from Chief Executive from Octopus Electric Vehicles, which provides leasing business that makes it easier for people to switch to clean green driving, and offering EV salary sacrifice schemes, and also, very importantly, oversees the Power Loop project, the world's largest vehicle-to-grid project. And Octopus EV is part of the Octopus Energy Group. We're also joined by Jerry Stokes, the Executive Chairman of Gridsurf. Jerry has an extensive experience of leadership that he's in the renewables and clean tech industries, which he's gained over the last 20 years, including serving on the UN Secretary General's Advisory Group on Energy and Climate Change. He is also a board member of Solar Energy UK and a member of the REA's EV Forum Steering Group. And as Chief Executive Chairman of Gridsurf, and through being an EV driver himself, he has a deep understanding of the challenges that need to be overcome to accelerate the uptake of EVs. And then finally, we have Ben Lane, co-founder and Chief Technology Officer for Zap-Map. Ben already has been presenting this morning, and as you're aware, he's got a wealth of experience over the last 20 years gained in terms of developing the market for zero-emission vehicles and technologies. Zap-Map has been at the core of consumer information, or Ben has been at the core of providing consumer information, firstly through My Next Green Car, and more recently through Zap-Map. And with recent investments from Good Energy, which has been secured, he's looking to develop that further in the future. So I'm going to open today's event by bringing our panelists into the conversation from the outset and ask them to consider, I'll respond to two questions as part of an opening statement, which I'm going to turn to each of them to provide to kick off the debate. And as part of their responses, I'm asking them to think about the future of road transport. How different do we expect it to be from today? How are you going to be using it? Is there going to be more shared mobility rather than personal mobility? And how are we going to be charging these vehicles if they're going to be electric vehicles? Also, I'd like them to think about to deliver government's objective for all cars and vans to be zero emissions by 2035. What will we need to focus on to make electrification of transport a compelling proposition to motorists and fleets? As I said, we want this to be an interactive session. So after we've gone to each of the panelists and asked them to provide their opening statements, we'll be opening the floor to questions, which if you could put that in the chat or to raise your hand, we'll come to you in turn. So first of all then, I'd like to turn to Rolle Nieminen, Director of EVA England. So Rolle, would you like to provide your opening statement?
Thanks, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you've enjoyed the conference so far today. My name is Rolle Nieminen, and I'm a board member and one of the founding members of Electric Vehicle Association England. EVA England was established in June 2020 by 6 passionate EV enthusiasts who were inspired by the advocacy and services that consumer associations offer to EV drivers in Scotland, the Netherlands, Norway, and the USA. During the pandemic and the resulting lockdown, we met weekly to share our experiences and hone what we wanted an EV-focused members organization to be in England. We want to offer a voice for current, new, and prospective electric vehicle drivers and accelerate the transition to an electric England. We aim to support and represent EV drivers in England and to offer unbiased advice on all things electric vehicles, providing guides and tips for current and prospective drivers, as well as grow an empowered community of EV drivers in England. Then, as Jonathan requested, I will now look into my crystal ball. So in the next 10 years, I see that the shift to zero emissions vehicles is going to be dramatic, and it will probably happen sooner than anticipated. And it will be going to predominantly battery electric vehicles. That shift has already started, as you can see from the sales figures, with people moving to BEVs for a number of reasons. Reasons like environmental impact, but also technology. Cost is a significant reason. EVs are cheaper for many drivers. For example, my pre-COVID commute was 100 miles a day. So my energy cost for that was £1 in an EV instead of 13 in a diesel vehicle. Also, performance and improved driving experience are reasons why people will be moving to EVs. So the other part of the question was about shared mobility and usage. I hope that we won't move one-to-one from internal combustion to EVs, as that would just mean cleaner and quieter congestion. Car sharing is developing, mobility as a service and subscription models are adding choices, but a private EV is still going to be a very relevant form of transport for majority of people for a long time to come. And people will use their vehicles to commute and to move their families around much like they do today. I think the really big opportunity for sharing and changing the usage comes with autonomous vehicles when the legislation and technology is ready for that. And what about charging all those new EVs? Well, one of the benefits of an EV is that you don't need to be holding a liquid fuel hose at a dedicated facility to replenish your energy reserves. Electricity is everywhere. An average car is parked for 95% of the time, and that is the best time to charge it. Also, an average driver only needs to charge for 5 to 6 hours per week on a home charger and half an hour using a rapid charger. So you don't need to need a dedicated charger for every car. They just need to be available where people live their lives, sleep, work, and do leisure activities. For the core charging needs, we need a mix of existing, emerging, and future solutions that serve the drivers at or near their homes or workplaces where the car is parked anyway. That way the vehicle is ready for daily duties, as the majority of driving is local for majority of drivers. Of course, the strategic road network of the future needs a strong coverage of high-powered chargers to ensure that longer journeys can be completed seamlessly. Even the current high-powered chargers can add more than 180 miles of range in about 20 minutes to compatible vehicles. Up-to-date and accurate sharing of availability information with drivers or their navigation systems would also make planning a breeze. So where should the focus be? Information and education to dispel myths, misinformation, and even disinformation about EVs. We need to address real and perceived cost concerns. There is a clear lack of base level EVs. The existing models tend to be more on the higher spec ranges. While the current selection is total cost ownership competitive with the equivalent ICE vehicles, they tend to be those higher specification models. And we need to open up the total cost of ownership versus sticker price information to consumers. We also need to ensure that the used car trade has the abilities to create a buoyant secondhand market. When we consider charging, we need to ensure that the access to that charging is equitable. Simple and transparent payments and pricing are key to charging being a success factor in electrification. Those are the key focus areas from my perspective. Thank you very much, and looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Rolle. I'd like to now turn to Howarth from Octopus Electric Vehicles. Fiona, obviously with your experience at Octopus, you're looking to engage with both fleets and to encourage them and to information to their employees in terms of their salary sacrifice, and also looking at the future in terms of the Power Loop project. What's your perspective on the future market for that electric vehicles are going to be fulfilling in the UK, and how do we really make a compelling case to EV drivers to take these up?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jonathan, and thanks for having me. It's really good to see some familiar faces, and I know some others are online as well, so that's great. As you said, so I lead Octopus EV, and we make it as simple as possible for individuals and businesses to make that switch to electric driving with the vehicles, the charging, and the energy tariffs, and also partnerships with public charging operators as well. So that's great, and we're part of the Octopus Energy group, as you said, so we can really cover all those bases. I think it's really interesting. I often, before I come on one of these forums, I always check Zap-Map. It's really such a pleasure to be here with Ben. And because actually there's a lot of myths, right? There's loads of myths out there in terms of like how many charge points are there? And it comes up always as one of the top 3 things why people don't want to get electric cars. And actually, every time I come on, I have to check Zap-Map because they're growing so quickly that I'm always slightly out of date as to how many there are. So thank you, Ben, for keeping an amazing source of information of all the charge points. I checked just now, it's almost 16,000 locations where you can publicly charge your car, which is amazing. And actually, of course, we can all home charge. Well, I'm sorry, we can't all home charge. Correction, sorry. And a huge number of us can home charge. And then a number of us can then use other street side charging and so forth. And so it's just fantastic to see this kind of surge in terms of charge points. And also, what a pleasure to be sharing a panel with the chairman for Gridsurf, who obviously we've just announced around the electric highway, because always we have to check Zap-Map to see what the quality of the charge points are going to be and whether they're going to work, which is obviously really critical for all of us who switched over. So huge thank you to the Gridsurf team as well for taking on that challenge to sort out the motorway charge points for everyone. So and basically bring that around. So I think when we do ask people what's putting them off, there's 3 things: cost, number of charge points, and the range of the cars. And actually a lot of this is now around perception. So to Rolle's point, the cost, actually total cost of ownership, really starts to stack up. And actually with salary sacrifice, to your point, that's what we do, we've really specialised in. Salary sacrifice, actually without the savings on fuel costs, is now better value to go electric than it is to take the petrol diesel equivalent. So we've done a huge amount of analysis now looking at, say, the Volkswagen ID3 versus the Golf. And do you know what? The ID3 comes out cheaper even before the fuel saving, even before Rolle's £10 a day saving that he's making now in that EV rather than the car that he was driving before in his commute. So all of these things start to stack up, but actually people don't know about it. So we asked people, actually, did they know about salary sacrifice? And do you know what? 67% of the people we asked had never, ever heard of it. They had no idea that they could get an electric car out of their gross salary and save 30 to 40% every month. And actually, we need to kind of spread the word. Another 20% had kind of heard of it, but they didn't really know any details. And I think about 11% thought they got offered it at work. So actually, what we really need to do is spread the word, and we need to get business leaders to take a massive, massive leadership role now in making this amazing benefit available to their staff so that we can start to unlock that massive cost competitive advantage there for their employees. So that makes it really stack up, and then they can get Rolle's fuel savings on top of that as well and save their £10 a day towards their expensive lunch as they go back to the office. So we've got cost we can tackle, and then we've got number of charge points, which per Ben's stats always blew people's mind when they actually find out about it. And then the range of the cars has really gone through the roof with the kind of more than 30 cars now that we're offering compared to the 5 that we had 4 years ago. So there's huge numbers of cars, the range has gone up significantly on a number of them. There's a lot of options, and actually we see over 70% of people wanting to make that switch in their next car. So why are they not doing it? I think what we really need to think about is this being a supply-led market. The car manufacturers make a number of cars that they get, and they bring them to the UK, and where they have cars, they bring terms, they bring stock, and they bring knowledge and expertise to their salespeople in terms of what it's like to drive an electric car, how enthusiastic they are when you walk into one of their dealerships and they want to test drive it, and then the knowledge around the charge points and Gridserve taking over the electric highway and how amazing it's going to be as they upgrade all of that kit and so forth. And actually just what Zap-Map is, like, if you walk into a dealership today, they're going to help sit you down and introduce you to Zap-Map and show you where the charge points are near your house and so forth. So actually with the supply of those vehicles, yes, they will be taught how to do that more increasingly so as we see that happening. Now, it's been fantastic, don't get me wrong, it's been fantastic to hear about the 2030 ban. It's been fantastic to see a huge number of car manufacturers now getting behind this switch. And we've seen so many car manufacturers make big announcements in the last year around making, switching fully electric by 2030, 2033, 2035, whenever they're doing it. But the sooner we can make that happen, the quicker we can tackle those carbon emissions that you were talking about at the beginning, that third of the UK's carbon emissions from transport, and also, quite frankly, the 40,000 deaths a year that are happening from air pollution and the £20 billion that the NHS is spending on it. So as quickly as we can make that happen, the better. And I think really looking at that supply chain, and with more cars, will give people like Gridsurf more confidence to invest in more charge points and other charge point operators. And we'll see more innovation in that space as we kind of make that switch. So more cars, let's work with the car manufacturers, let's make that switch quicker.
Great, thank you very much, Fiona, for your perspective there. It's all about the information, the infrastructure, the supply, and the range. Octopus electric vehicles is making a great case in bringing out those offers to market. Next, I want to turn to Jerry Stokes, Executive Chairman of Gridserve. Gridsurf, who have been hitting the headlines this year with their flagship electric forecourt in Braintree and the acquisition of Ecotricity's electric highway network. Jerry, from your perspective as an EV driver and the chairman of Gridsurf, looking at your business model and how you see people using their EVs in the future, how is that going to fit in? And also, what's from your perspective, what's the compelling case that we need to make to EV drivers?
Well, good afternoon all. Jonathan, thank you very much indeed for that introduction, and Fiona, thank you for your kind words as well. It's always a pleasure to work with such experienced co-panelists, and it's always exciting to have the opportunity of sharing collectively our views on the market to such a wide audience. If I can answer the question, Jonathan, by first of all putting into context, who Gridsurf are and why we've suddenly sort of jumped onto the Zap-Map. So Gridsurf are a team of highly experienced renewable energy guys team, and we built a large fleet of solar farms in our previous lives. And in Gridsurf, we started off, in fact, building a large 200-acre solar farm. So we've got an intimate knowledge that actually the grid and grid access is one of the key constraints to being able to meet the public's expectations for a lot of fast chargers in convenient locations. And so Gridsurf, as the name suggests, comes from a grid-led approach to understanding how we can most readily deploy electric vehicle charging. And you kindly mentioned, Jonathan, our flagship electric forecourt, which opened in Braintree in the middle of lockdown. That was a project that was supported with OZEV and Innovate UK and Hitachi Capital. And that site has 30 350 kilowatt chargers, as well as 6 AC chargers. And it's a dedicated site. And so that really was our sort of our blueprint, if you like. And Gridsurf's plan has been to develop, engineer, procure, construct, own and operate electric vehicle charging infrastructure, leveraging our knowledge from having built solar farms. And so when we then look at the challenges ahead, we can see that actually range anxiety is something that we believe has now been put to bed. There are enough cars out there with enough range to satisfy most people's journeys. And as Graham Cooper from National Grid often cites, 3 and a bit hours in a car is most people's bladder range. So our locations are not geared towards public toilets, but they are located towards where people are going to be wanting to stop and charge their vehicles. And so we think that charge anxiety has replaced range anxiety. And so in answer to your questions, therefore, charging we see is key, whether we're talking about autonomous vehicles, whether we're talking about shared ownership or private ownership or whatever. And in order to make that compelling for individuals and fleets, Gridsurf's view is that charging infrastructure needs to be convenient. So it needs to be near to major road networks. It needs to be near to population centers. It needs to be easy to use with contactless payment. You don't need an app. You don't need an RFID card. Make it very straightforward. It needs to be dependable. So multiple charges at any site with telephone support that actually does support, where people on the other end of the line are empowered to take action. And just a point there, people often say that, oh, the chargers aren't very reliable. In actual fact, a lot of experience that we've got from our electric forecourt is that it's the interface between the vehicle and the charger. And the charger is always the one that gets, given the proverbial kicking, but it's very often the communication with the car that is the bigger issue. But the key for us is to put the customer at the center of the charging experience And so that's why we have excellent telephone support. In terms of the chargers themselves, yes, we did recently purchase the electric highway from Ecotricity. And what an incredible investment that was 10 years ago in an industry that actually there were very few electric vehicles. And we, whilst people sadly latterly have given it a bit of a kicking in terms of its reliability, Dale Vince was a real visionary in being able to install those chargers across the network. And it's a great honor for Gridsurf to now have the Gridsurf electric highway. And we've now upgraded over 80 sites with medium power chargers. And we will be also including higher power chargers. And they're all from tier 1 manufacturers. So for us, again, coming from the solar side, where investment and investors' money had to be backed up by the quality and reliability of the manufacturers. So by using tier 1 charger manufacturers, it means we've got excellent support should there be a technical issue. And we have our own in-house operation management and maintenance teams, again, so that we can provide both tier 1 support from the initial telephone call through to tier 2 support in-house up to tier 3 with the manufacturers. And we also think that, coming back to the comment about people needing a rest every now and then, we think that chargers need to be fast. And so we think it means they need to be able to put meaningful range into the car within a 20 to 30 minute charging stop. And so for us, that means somewhere between 50 and 150 miles of added range in that short period of time. We also think that it needs to be economic, fair pricing. There shouldn't be a higher price for faster charging. This is about investing for the long term rather than trying to make a quick buck out of the charging infrastructure. So we think it should be economic. And linked to that, we also believe that it needs to be zero net carbon. In other words, all of the charging of electric vehicles, if we're doing that from CO2 generating charging energy generation, then we actually haven't really moved forward very far. So we have our own solar farms, and we offset the carbon that goes into, the net zero energy going into the grid from our solar farms is what's used as the net zero energy that we will charge vehicles on our Gridsurf electric highway. And where possible, we will co-locate a solar farm, as we will be doing in Uckfield, where we're building the world's first solar electric forecourt with a co-located solar farm. And then, of course, these need to be accessible to all. We need to put the EV driver at the center of experience, and we need to make sure that that is all drivers, regardless of their relative abilities or their own accessibility needs. And so we work closely with Motability and Designability to ensure that these are accessible for all. And so charging is key, having the infrastructure that's convenient, dependable, reliable, fast, economic, zero net carbon. And we put all that together under what we call a sun to wheel ecosystem. And that includes also vehicle leasing. So Fiona and Gridsurf are in the same part of the market there, looking to make it very easy by providing top level information so that it makes it very easy for people to make the transition to electric vehicles.
I love that sun to wheel instead of well to wheel. That is a great, great idea. Thank you very much, Jerry. And finally, we turn now to Ben Lane. Ben, thank you so much earlier today for the history of the journey that we've been on. And it was a bit of a shock that you started with the Cleaner Vehicle Task Force, where we first both met at the beginning, and that was so long ago. So Ben, I'm going to turn to you now. Obviously, you've been at the fore of providing information to this market and supporting it. What are your perspectives on the market going forward, and how do we make that compelling case to private motorists and fleets?
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks for all the mentions to Zap-Map so far. I mean, the first thing I should say is that I don't take all the credit. We now have 4 data assistants who are updating. We obviously automate all the information coming on as much as we can. But we have 4 data assistants who check all the data. And I think actually, Jerry, you were talking about quality of service and customer first. That's always been. I think my focus, my contribution to the sector, if there is such one, the small c, is about understanding what the consumer, the customer and the consumer needs, what information they need, and that's what we do at Zap-Map. We're always thinking about what do they want and how can we deliver it. So apologies, I'm going to do a 1 minute intro on Zap-Map if I can, for those of you who don't know maybe some of the details. So we're essentially, we've got the largest EV audience in the UK, and we're really proud of that. And I'd say for us at Zap-Map, it's our user base. It's not just the registered users, it's all the users that use us free. But it's essentially, we've got over 200,000 downloads now. We have lots more users on the website. And I think our core audience, just to be clear, is pure electric vehicle drivers. So if we think there's almost 600,000 EVs in the UK, about 300,000 pure EV drivers, and 200,000 of those have downloaded the app. We have about 130,000 unique users a month, and it slightly frightens us every time we see the numbers crunching up, because it's a responsibility to provide really good information to that audience. What we do is we provide services for search, plan, pay, and drive. It's all based on data, and there's a lot of, actually we haven't talked much about data, and I'm going to be fairly brief so we got time for Q&A, but I think we should talk about data, because often we talk about the kit and we don't talk about the data, and the data is going to glue everything together for the rest of humanity, so especially in the transport sector. We're also working on fleets. We've signed a deal with Fleet Corps, working on fleet provision, and we're working partnership with Just Park on sharing chargers. And I think the last thing I'll say on Zap-Map is we think at least 75% of all EV drivers arriving at a charge point in the UK have Zap-Map open. So we were very keen to add all the services like Pay, Zap Pay, so they can continue on that experience. We can come back to app versus contactless hopefully later. I think, coming back to your question, Jonathan, about where's the market going, I think with sort of a headline question about where mobility is going, I would love to say that I think we're all going to share vehicles more. I'm a great fan of public transport. I don't think that's where the culture is going. I think where global culture is going is towards personal transport. So whether that's I think that's probably a bad thing, but I think that's where we're going. But I do think we have a huge contribution to make by electrifying all of transport. And I think if we put electrification into context, I think we're not just talking about batteries. We're talking about, I'm a physicist by, I started off as a physicist. I'm not a physicist anymore, but I think where we're going is a solid state future where the only thing that moves is electrons. Possibly that still includes hydrogen, because in a fuel cell, you've got protons or electrons moving, but nothing else. So I think eventually we're going to electrify everything, and transport, I don't think, will be any different. As far as where I think, I would take up a point, your comment about what can we do to make EVs compelling, Jonathan. Yes, 10% of year-to-date sales are EV, but in June it was 1 in 6. 1 in 6 cars had a plug in the UK. 1 in 6. I mean, that's an extraordinary number, and we're still accelerating away. So soon that'll be 1 in 4, 1 in 3, 1 in 2. We will get to 100%, I think, very, very quickly. And I think as far as charging infrastructure is concerned, about how can we make it all happen, we need masses of charging opportunities everywhere. And I think we will end up with electricity in all sectors, including home heating. And I think we will end up with charge points everywhere. I think there will be at home, at work, at destination, en route. There will be low power, medium power, fast, rapid, ultra rapid. There will be contactless, there will be wireless, there will be conduction, what we have now. And I just think that the only way to make this happen is to make it ubiquitous. The good news is that the grid is almost ubiquitous. I've probably got about, in the room I'm in, I've probably got about 6 2.5 kilowatt sockets. I could charge if I could get my car in the room, I could charge my car. Unfortunately, I'm one of those people without a home charger, but it doesn't make any difference. And I think the last thing I would say is, whatever we do, and I'm going to focus particularly on the charging, it has to be simple, simpler. It has to be as simple as you can make it. And Tesla have been doing this for 8-9 years. You plug in your car. You don't. I run a company that has an app. You don't need anything. You just plug it in and it charges. That's where we need to end up. Not even contactless cards. And we're actually working, it may surprise you, we are very pro-app and pro-contactless, but we are working on spoofing ISO 15118. I personally don't think that ISO standard, I think it's too prescriptive, but I think we can make it happen with data, because we know where the driver is, we know where the car is, we know where the charger is, we know the supplier. We can just glue it all together with data and make the magic happen by delivering those electrons and transferring whatever funds and charges needs to be transferred at the time. So I'm going to leave it there because I'm really looking forward to questions from the audience.
Great, thank you, Ben. Okay, so at this point, it's where we're going to open it up to the rest of the audience to ask questions, make comments. You can do that, and some people have been posting some questions in the chat. Otherwise, if you'd like to raise a hand, you can do that, and we'll come to people. I think to kick it off, though, I'd just like to reflect on the fact that listening to this, it's been a bit of a love-in, right? So
very true.
It's all hunky-dory, and we don't need to, we've already got a compelling proposition. Okay, my challenge to this is to get the ball rolling, is that haven't we got most of the low-hanging fruit already? Haven't we got most of the people who, most of the people who are gonna, who are innovators and interested in EVs and have off-street parking capability at home already adopting these vehicles? Haven't we got most of the fleets who are interested in their green credentials and doing something for the environment and adopting electric vehicles, who've got space on their depots and a cheap connection to the grid already doing it? And aren't we going to run out of those soon? So who would like to answer that? So Rolle, I'm going to come back to you as representative of the EV community. And I know that you've been doing some surveys. And I know, Ben, you're Zap-Map's keen on doing surveys as well. What are your perspectives on how we get to the rest of the market?
Yeah, I think that I'm not even sure that we've captured the early adopters, all of them, because like you said, we've there's I think it was Ben saying that we've got 300,000 battery electric vehicles on the roads now, and there are, when you look at the sort of usual curves of bell curves of where people sit, I don't think 300,000 even covers that. One of the key things is that obviously now the supply of EVs is hugely increasing. Surprise, surprise! After 2020, when the EU legislation about emissions came to power. So now there's plenty. There's no huge waiting times for a lot of the vehicles, and I think that has obviously added to the growth in last year and this year. There are going to be, I just saw a figure that Volkswagen is offering another 75 battery electric vehicles to their offering in the next 10 years. So there's going to be vehicles that will fit more and more people's needs, because yes, for some of us who jumped on the electric bandwagon early, it was very much about the technology being in the forefront. But for others who are not prepared to make compromises in how they use their vehicle, then now with a lot of supply and the visibility of places like the electric highway, the other charging stations with your on-street chargers popping up here, there, and everywhere, that is giving people confidence that this is actually this is what they should be doing. And I think, Fiona, you said that it's 70% according to your research. 70% of people are interested in that. So yeah, the lowest of the low-hanging fruit maybe, but not all of it.
Yeah, I would pick up on it actually, because I also think that it becomes it's viral. You know, it's like solar panels. When you walk into a street, you know, and you see solar panels on one house, then you see it on other houses as well down the street. And it's a bit like that with EVs. So you like see one, and then all of a sudden they all pop up because somebody's seen somebody driving around. It's like, oh, you've got a Tesla, you've got a Nissan Leaf. What is it like? How do you really charge? You just charge it up overnight. You don't have to detour for diesel. Oh, that's interesting. Or, but what about longer journeys? Oh, there's these, like, you know, super fast chargers, and you can just use Zap-Map and you can find out where they are. Well, that's easier than I thought, but they work, you know. And then people learn about it. We used to say that, you know, that person that used to turn up at your barbecue and they'd be like showing off their like new iPhone. And then next time they came along, they've got their new Apple Watch. And now they're turning up with their EV and they're like, come out and see my EV. And you know, I charge it up in the middle of the night for a third of the price. But also when I came here today, I stopped at Braintree and they've got all these amazing chargers, you know, so it's really, really viral.
Could I just pick up on the sort of low-hanging fruit issue? I think, yeah, and you're quite right. We do surveys, we do annual surveys. I think in the last one, only essentially 98% of our users currently charge at home, and that is so far off where we will go. And I think I raised it this morning in this morning session, is that 40%, there's 8 million households don't have off-street parking, and I think that's a real problem. And I actually think that those last sort of 3 or 4 meters are the only thing that worry me, actually. Jerry, it doesn't worry me because I'm not installing ultra high power chargers. It doesn't worry me because I know that you're working hard on it, right? So, but I can't see any, and I know that, you know, Ubertricity is out there, and I know Connected Curb. I just can't see the numbers getting out there at the moment, the 8 million. And it's not just 8 million somewhere, it needs to be 8 million in the right place. And you need to make sure that someone else doesn't park there, which is more, so it's not just a technical problem, there's a cultural problem there. So probably, yeah, maybe we need 16 million, I'm just making this up, 16 million on-street chargers to make sure there's always one available when you need one. And at the moment, I'm thinking we just need some very low tech innovation, like a cable guide underneath pavement, right? But it has to be, you know, we know people trail cables and we tell them not to, but we know that people do. But yeah, is there a safe way you can get a cable under a pavement, but not just one pavement, every pavement? Maybe we need to change something about our built infrastructure, but it's at scale. And it's very simple, but it's the at scale bit, which is the problem. Because, you know, I'm actually old enough to remember when, I remember as a kid, every street being dug up to get rid of coal gas into natural gas. And, you know, it blew my mind that every pavement was being dug up. We have to do the same again. And it's just to make sure that this high-tech, clean technology can be realized. So maybe we've got a very low-tech problem, which is going to stop us providing zero-emission mobility.
Go on, Jerry.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was going to say, you know, I agree with Ben that we've all suffered from pavements being dug up one week, and then about 3 weeks later they're dug up again, and a brand new road surface goes down and it all gets dug up. So I think that there is a generic design opportunity there. I think from Gridsurf's perspective, we can see that if you took a notional street with 100 houses in, and you had 100 on-street chargers of 7 kilowatts, and people all come home at the end of the evening and plug in, probably that street doesn't have 700 kilowatts of spare capacity on its grid connection. So our view is that whilst that on-street charging like that clearly does have a very important part to play in the total mix, as you said, and other colleagues on the panel have said, it's about having reliable, dependable, convenient charging infrastructure near to where you are. And in many locations, there actually isn't a petrol station within a convenient distance away. So I think we should just be sort of realistic about the, you know, what is the requirement here.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. Sorry, just from my perspective, I think there's different levels of this. And for me, I'm starting to think of this a bit like Wi-Fi. So, you know, when you're at Wi-Fi, you expect like relatively inexpensive Wi-Fi at home. And then you're willing to pay for convenient Wi-Fi. So let's say you're at an airport or a train station or whatever, you're going to pay more for that Wi-Fi that day, but it's really important and so you want it. So there are days in which I'm going to be willing to pay 10 times as much per kilowatt hour to be able to use super fast, convenient, reliable charging. I'm going to be very, very happy that it's going to turn up to a Gridsurf site and it's going to work first time. It's going to be super smooth and super easy. I'm still going to be very happy to go home and charge at home. Now, recognise that I think it's 40% of homes that don't have driveways, but actually I think it's about 30% of drivers don't have driveways. So that 30%, yeah, they might be using curbside charging, so like street lamps and so forth. But I wonder if there's also more of an innovative solution that we're going to find where more people will make slower charging available to those people. So whether it's driveways that people are starting to make available, so I think even Zap-Map have a solution to be able to make people's driveways available, and there's other solutions out there. And I think other, say, council car parks, for example, or other places where we could put in lower rate charge points where people can charge up overnight at low cost. Because I think there was a question earlier, which is like, what's an acceptable rate to pay for the public charging? And I think the fact is that actually we will pay more for those faster chargers, those superchargers, because they're really expensive. They're really expensive, and the grid connections are expensive, and the capacity in the grid to be able to charge your car at that rate, or to be able to put in some kind of battery storage on that site, is expensive. So actually it's finding that balance between how we can unlock some of the lower rate green charging for some of those drivers that don't have off-street parking as well.
Okay, great. There's I'm going to come to Crispin Hodges in a minute, who's got had his hand up, but I just want to sort of just finish off. We have a couple of questions in the chat that's about rural communities, and whether we're going to be whether there's a risk that we're going to be leaving rural communities behind. Is there something from, perhaps addressing here to Jerry and Fiona, is there something about rural communities that makes it more difficult to provide the infrastructure, particularly for charging? And I know Braintree isn't exactly the centre of London. And in fact, I've got a colleague who's from his kitchen window, I think, can see your forecourt, and has been updating us on how the building is going over the last year or so. But is there something specific that we need to address in thinking about rural communities? Jerry, perhaps you first.
Sure. Clearly, the objective is to have charging infrastructure available for everybody. And from a pure investment model, then it's quite difficult in a village with 10 or 15 houses to see how it's going to make sense to have a high power charger. However, as we've already been discussing, very typically there will be more potential for off-street parking in a rural community than there will be in an inner city area. And secondly, we've certainly talked to other companies involved in providing charging infrastructure who are working with things like village halls, local sports club facilities, scout huts, etc. So there generally are buildings, if I say even, I don't mean to be that in a rude way, but within a rural community, pubs, there are community buildings, and there are certainly charging infrastructure companies who are working, for example, with pubs, with local village halls, and are also looking at residential charging as well. I'll let Fiona add.
Okay, Fiona.
I mean, I completely agree. You typically have more off-street parking in rural communities, so people will be able to charge up a lot more at home. Actually, that's likely to be much more convenient than getting to their local petrol station, which, to Jerry's point, there's only 8,500 places you can fill up your petrol car at the minute. There's already almost 16,000 places you can fill up your EV publicly. And then these people will be able to do it at home, most of them. So that's great. And then also building on Jerry's point, if there are rural communities where you still don't have access to the off-street parking, and you don't put one in at home, then there are community locations like scout huts and so forth, which again are typically less expensive to be able to get kilowatt hours to than putting in superchargers and things, which I don't think necessarily would be the most appropriate anyway. Okay.
Right, so Crispin, you've been waiting with your hand up. Your arm must be aching by now. Crispin, over to you.
Okay.
Unmute yourself.
I've had a battery electric vehicle for a year, and it's been I'm delighted, and I do tell all my friends. There are some things that I don't tell them, perhaps. One of which is about charger reliability, and I know Gridsurf are trying to do something about that. And the other one, I'm going to ask two questions really, is about the proliferation of apps, charger apps. which I think is a big negative. I keep on well, mostly I charge at home, but I keep on going to chargers and discovering I have to download yet another app. This is crazy, and it's really off-putting. And two of the people on the front table here are responsible for their own apps. Electric Juice, which I'm a test driver of. Is it really necessary? Wouldn't it be better if there was one app for the whole country where you could go and find out what the price was and the availability was? Why are we getting more and more? Gridsurf are doing it as well. There's a new app for them. I know they're sharing their information, but really, we don't want more apps. We want one place we can go and know exactly what we're going to get. And the other thing, just a specific one to Zap-Map, I'm concerned it's going to really put people off when they see so many out-of-service chargers. Is that really a true representation? Something's out of service. What mechanism puts it back into service? Because I'm not going to go there if it's marked as out of service. I'm never going to report it now works.
So Ben, perhaps we can come to you first, as Zap-Map's been referred to there, and the charges that are faulty. Information, you mentioned data, and in a future world where we want real-time information for a smart grid charger, smart charger, and a smart EV, and do it smartly when, where, and for what price we want. How do we get to that interoperable future where we can rock up at any charge point and and charge, and what about how we go about making sure that the charge points are operating?
Sure. Okay, maybe if I can, Crispin, I'll maybe address the out of service issue first. I think the ethical and the right way forward is to show the most accurate information. And I do take your point that almost the red does, in a sense, jumps out at you more than the green. But I think we've got over 70% of charge points in the UK. We have live dynamic information. So if the networks say that something's working or not, that's what we show on our statuses. We then supplement that. We actually supplement all of the devices with user-generated statuses. Now, there are some of the networks where we didn't have dynamic input. For instance, historically, we didn't have electric highway. Working with Jerry now, that's going to change. So all we had, well, not all we had, but our users were helping each other by saying, this one's working and this one isn't. And I think while overall the number of out of action, the out of service units has or was falling before COVID, it does, understandably, it's got worse and now it's falling again. So while the proportion is actually low, it does appear often more because actually you're looking for on a strategic route on a motorway, but actually that's where you need to know. And what we do at Zap-Map is we try to make it very clear that this is an automatic update and this is a user update. And if the user update was from 1 week ago, then that we don't have any more information. That's you have to make your own mind up. If we had information from 5 minutes ago, then we would give it to you. So, but I think the bottom line is it just has to be honest and as accurate as possible. Like all platforms, it's a never-ending battle to make it accurate. I think, but that's what we're striving to do. And I think on the other issue is, you probably shouldn't ask me about the number of apps. We as an aggregator, as the UK leading aggregator, we want everyone to use Zap-Map. At the same time, we understand why the networks want their own apps, and we just decide that we're going to, by making Zap-Map as easy to use as possible, that in the long run, the users will just use Zap-Map. So there are business reasons why different networks have different strategies. Some just go, we'll put it on Zap-Map. Some go, we'll put it on Zap-Map and we're going to have our own app. Some do it the other way around. We're only going to put our own app. In a way, I think the market will decide. Ideally, we are integrating with all of the networks that want to work with us. And I'd say that's over 70% of charge points now, and it's growing. For payments as well, we've got some more announcements coming out next week. But I think the market will decide, and that's why we put so many hours in just trying to make the user experience, the UI and the UX in digital terms, as good as we possibly can.
Right. Hope we're coming to the last 5 minutes of our session, which is gone incredibly quick. And we've been focusing a lot on the consumer experience. We've been focusing a lot on the infrastructure mix and how to bring the infrastructure forward and the consumer experience. I want to point to a different question which has been posed, and is much more about how we ensure we get the EV supply, the vehicle supply into the UK. And the question, which has been posted by a previous colleague of mine, Greg Archer at TNT, OZEV's green paper is consulting on whether to regulate to achieve the phase out using a ZEV mandate that offers certainty concerning EV sales. Would you think that is preferential, or in that it's giving certainty, or to use a CO2 approach that offers manufacturers more flexibility as to how the targets are met? What would the panel prefer? A mandate which is saying this is the proportion of sales that are going to be ZEVs, or flexibility in saying, okay, it's a CO2 target and you have to meet that through some kind of mixture of your vehicle sales, including ZEVs? That's going to be an intriguing one. So I'm going to pose that as the last question that we're going to handle. Rolle, do you have a perspective from EVA England?
Yeah, I think that we are at the moment evaluating this situation. Obviously, a zero emissions mandate has been used in California, and initially it started created some of the compliance vehicles, etc. Obviously, now the supply is very different to what it was some years ago in the American market. So it wouldn't necessarily bring about those unwanted results. The CO2 limitations and penalties on manufacturers for going over that's obviously very much the European Union methodology on that. And then obviously we have Norway, who have basically a consumer led approach where if you buy a vehicle that has significant CO2 emissions, then you pay a penalty through a purchase tax, and if you buy a zero emissions, then you even get a reduced VAT rate. So those are three options. We've been reviewing this. I think that we will come to a conclusion from EVA England's perspective, but those I think the three areas that we are evaluating.
Okay. I understand this is a difficult and putting people on the spot. It's outside their business models, but Fiona, do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think to my kind of opening statement, I think it's really, really important that we work with these car manufacturers right now to encourage them to move their supply chains over, move their manufacturing over as quickly as possible, and also bring as many of them to the UK as possible. I think the ZEV mandate, the California style mandate has a huge number of positives. I think that would give the charging teams a lot of confidence as well in terms of the number of vehicles that will be arriving, in terms of utilization and things that they get, but also in terms of the training that the car manufacturers would be doing with their teams, and the knowledge that would then increase the number of cars on the road, that virality, I don't know if that's a word, but that viral impact that we were talking about earlier in terms of people telling each other about it and having more cars. I think that would really stimulate the market in a very positive way.
Jerry, what would be your perspective?
Thank you. Yeah, I think mandates are always slightly dangerous because governments have a habit of suddenly changing the terms of reference of a mandate, and they have a habit of suddenly changing in a very short notice. So, vis-a-vis the reduction in the grant for the vehicles, to do it kind of overnight doesn't really help the industry. Having said that, I do think that from a manufacturer's perspective, if they feel that they're constrained on their manufacturing output, they're more likely to only make higher value cars, higher price point cars. So I think a mandate can have a positive influence on driving the volume of vehicles across all price points. I'll stop there and let Ben have a word.
Yeah, Ben, you got.
Zerv mandates worry me. I like the idea, but I think there's, initially in California, I haven't looked into it for a while, but way back when, I remember the initial ZEV mandates didn't quite work. Back in the noughties, the OEMs weren't able to deliver, and it sort of undermined the whole process. I think again, it's about can you guarantee supply? At the moment, there's a chip problem for cars. It's not about batteries; it's about chips. Can there are always unknowns coming down the track. So I think instinctively, I would favour a fee bait. Rolle, I think it was the third option you were talking about. There are lots of different flavours. France did it a decade ago really successfully, and other countries have tried it. And essentially, what I like about a fee bait is that essentially the companies that are producing more polluting cars, even if that's plug-in hybrids as compared to zero emission, they have to pay money to the companies at the forefront. So it's like there's a lovely sort of innovation cycle, a symmetry to it. And once all cars are electric, you can do other things. You can then spin that forwards to longer range, or having hydrogen, range extended, or whatever you want to do. So it can be a never-ending cycle. It's not you just create this proportion of ZEVs and that's the end of it, with the attendant unintended consequences there might be. So that's my best guess.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much. I'm sorry to throw a curveball at the end, which is a hard one to address, and it can be a fascinating issue that we're going to have to resolve. I'm going to draw the session to a close now. Thank you very much to our speakers, Rolle, Nieminen, Fiona Howarth, Jerry Stokes, and Ben Lane. A number of questions have been put in the chat. What I'd suggest, if we haven't been able to address them, you're able to contact our speakers through the chat, through the platform now or later. And I hope you enjoy the rest of today's conference. And I look forward to perhaps speaking to you at the end of the day. Thank you very much, everybody.